I'm Mo Golden, and you're watching Art Kitchen. Today's interview is with Deborah Koff-Chapin, the creator of Soul Cards, Soul Touch coloring journals, and the touch drawing method, which has been used by artists, art therapists, and intuitives for decades. Deborah holds workshops all over the US and sometimes abroad, and her annual touch drawing gathering on Whidbey Island is her deepest event, oriented to people who want to facilitate touch drawing in their own unique ways. Deborah has served on the board of the International Expressive Arts Therapy Association and has presented and made art at numerous conferences and events such as the American Art Therapy Association and the Parliament of World Religions. You can find Deborah online at touchdrawing.com, and this is the second of a two-part interview, so make sure you check out the first one too. Do you need to create in order to be healthy?
I'm sure I do. Yes. Now, how changes over time. So the challenge, I think, in a lifetime of doing it is, how do I do it in a way that feels alive and right for me at this phase of my life? You know, and that always changes. And there's hard time periods. It doesn't mean I don't go through time periods where I don't know my way to do it right now. You know, and I don't feel as healthy yet during those time periods. When I get too caught up in administrative work and I'm not making that space, I mean, it's why I took a sabbatical. I was just going too far, you know, too much organizing of travel. And I knew every time I was in a workshop, the workshops were becoming my creative field. And they felt so right. I said, how could I stop doing the thing that feels so right? But I knew there were all these other things I wasn't getting to, so I was very torn, you know? And the coloring books would never have happened. And I still need more time. So it's more like a stopping point where I'm reforming my life than a sabbatical, now I go back to where I was, you know? But, so I am in process around it. But one of the ways, I think one of the things that's happened is I'm not sure how to do a personal creative process at this phase of my life. The more relational ones and interpersonal and transpersonal ones come more naturally to me, like drawing for events and doing one-on-one sessions with people and things like that. It's like, I don't think I need to do my own little, when I sit down to do, how do I feel right now? How do I feel right now? How do I feel right now? It doesn't, like, I think I've done enough of that. And so the interpretive touch drawing branch of my work has really become a major part of it. And right now I'm very full with it because I have been doing it a lot the last few weeks. I did the most major thing in my whole life in October, where I was the interpretive artist for the Parliament of World Religions.
Wow.
And it may not have come to fullest fruition in terms of how my work was integrated, but I was there and I got to do it. It was such a big conference, everybody had to deal with the fact that there were little things that weren't perfectly set up for them. I was so grateful to be there at that phenomenal event with 10,000 people from every religion in the world, including pagans and indigenous and the major world religions, and all focusing on the issues of the planet instead of issues between each other. It was a phenomenal event, really. And I got to draw. I mean, it was amazing. I was going nonstop. I barely slept, barely ate. And I love that. So I feel I'm fully engaged as my artist self when I'm in a setting like that. And just this past week, I went to almost the opposite, a very intimate event at Whidbey Institute with a group of people called New Stories, who are, I think there's some kind of organizational consultants in a very general way who have worked in a particular line of thinking and creating and space holding, hosting and space holding. I'm invited to be part of this group now, and I did my touch drawing, and then the beauty of this was in an intimate group that's very process oriented, I put the drawings in the center. And throughout the whole 2.5 days together, people were seeing them, we're referring to them, we're engaging with them. And we worked with Rachel Bagby, who's a wonderful artist, soul sister, who she does a writing process called dekhas. It's like the Western haiku. And she taught people to write dekhas, and I encourage that they look at the drawings and write a dekhas to it, which are 10-syllable statements. And it was like, whoa, such a meeting of word and image. It was amazing, and we're looking at doing a book together now.
Wow.
So that's the collaborations. I think I've needed more creative collaborations.
Yeah.
And I'm also working. For many, many years, I have drawn during. My husband's a whirling dervish, and I've drawn during their semas, which is their ceremony where they wear the white things and they whirl and all of that. I mean, since maybe 1995, I have been drawing at the sema at least once a year, and sometimes at other retreats. So I built up this enormous body of work that nothing was happening with, but I did it anyway. And now there's a woman, very slowly over the last few years, who's one of their oldest, most mature students in the country, and she's working on a book about the sema, about the inner side of the sema, and she says she doesn't want to use any photographs, she's going to use only my drawings.
Wow.
So it's a year's process, but she says she's going to take a sabbatical now to really focus on it.
Wow.
So it's like such a long arc of work to finally be maybe beginning to have some of these things come into fruition.
Yeah.
It's a very long 1995 drawing semas. 20 years later, maybe 23, 4 years, there'll be a book, And so the persistence, actually I think persistence is one of the most important factors in any artistic pursuit, more than whatever talent is. It's just the dedication and passion to keep doing it. And people use the word talent. And I'm on a little thing about that because I don't even know what people mean by that, and it almost discounts how much work people do.
Yeah.
You've got a magical gift.
Yeah.
You have it, I don't. I can't. Oh, you've got a sacred gift.
Exactly.
Do you know how hard that person worked? Do you know their dedication? It didn't just happen.
Yeah.
Some people might have a little more ease in entering it. That's the talent part. That's it. If you don't dedicate yourself, it's not going to happen. If you don't have some passionate reason to stay with it, no way the talent part is going to help. So, and some people without a lot of that kind of ease gift get more dedicated and work harder and end up doing more. I had an art teacher tell me that at community college in high school. I took a class, and that really left an impression, because I guess I was like a talented one coming in, and he said, basically he was saying, just because you have talent doesn't mean you're going to be an artist.
Wow.
He says, sometimes the people who don't have it, they work harder, and they stay with it, and they really do it. So it's so many factors.
Yeah.
And the persistence over the long haul, I think, is the biggest difference.
And in your case too, it's like you weren't persisting with those drawings like, maybe someday there'll be a book with my drawings. You were persisting out of like a genuine inclination to do the work.
Absolutely. And I have done this interpretive touch drawing I had lost count at 500. I stopped counting for 500 different unique people while they were speaking.
Wow.
Yeah. There's been a lot more since then.
Yeah.
So, and some of those people multiple times. So I've done it a lot, since maybe 1982. The Earth Mass at Cathedral St. John the Divine was sort of the first time I think of myself as being there and drawing. And the only person who saw those drawings was my friend Nancy Rumble, who was playing oboe with a group in the ladies' room. We were in the bathroom, and I showed her the drawings that I did. That was it, But she was my sacred witness. And where was I going with it? So, there have been so many settings in which this particular aspect of my work has not been seen. People didn't understand it. It's hard to describe before, and even when I'm doing it, they don't get it, and they don't really make space for it, and sometimes it's been painful. Sometimes it's been very painful to the point of even getting sick. And but I can't stop doing it because I always go back to, if nothing else, this is such great studio time. You know, this is such an amazing, I can't sit alone in my studio and feel so energized as when I'm listening to someone and it's like a musician's jamming together.
Yeah.
And I bring this inspiration and these images. So if it's only for the purpose of creating images because I get great studio time, is still worth doing whether people ever see it or not. Mm-hmm. And so finally at this, you know, event that I just did this week, it was the most full integration of what I do in any group I've ever done it, actually.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was a long time coming.
Yeah.
But it's always been worth it, even when it's been hard. I wouldn't have stopped because of that. Mm-hmm. Like, when am I going to do a stream of 85 drawings? And then the harvest of doing the coloring books was pulling many drawings from all those settings, among other settings, out of the drawers and piles and years, and bringing them to a more universal, you know, access. And so the coloring book project was a place that I've been looking for, totally unexpectedly and by surprise, that format.
Yeah.
To harvest deeply into my body, my life's work, really. Yeah, that's really what it was, and that was the excitement of putting it together.
Cool.
Yeah.
What was, let's talk about the coloring books.
Yeah.
So what was that project like, a response to? Like, where did that call come from?
Great question. I love it because, okay, so for years now I've known I have all this work and I haven't known what to do with it. I've got the soul cards and I couldn't endlessly keep doing decks, you know, and a lot of it's not colored, and I actually like the purity of it, you know. I mean, I could color more of it, but I felt like this building, body of work, images piling up, and I was really asking, what do I do with my work that people will be interested in engaging with it?
Yeah.
And I thought about a book, sharing all the different places I've done touch drawing for all the different speakers, some kind of an art book, and maybe I'll do that someday, but I actually the energy didn't come and take hold. I felt like, oh, I'll work on it and no one's going to care anyway, you know? So it didn't have the energy. Nothing was taking hold, and I was really years asking the universe, what do I do with my work? And so the beginning of my sabbatical, and here's again the power of seeds, and I just saw the woman and talked to her about it. I was at a little party, and it was in March, so that's really the beginning of the sabbatical. And I was sitting with, you know, some people at this party after a Would Be Institute event, and I was talking and they were listening, and it was a wonderful kind of sharing circle of, I'm in a sabbatical and one of the things I want to do is really put some attention to what I do with my own art. And one woman said, why don't you do a coloring book? I would love to color on your images. She planted a seed. She really did. And I remember so clearly that moment where my mind was like, ugh, no way. I don't believe in coloring books. I teach people to create their own images. I wouldn't do a coloring book. And that was my mind. And in my belly, when she said, I would love to color on your drawings, I just like felt it. You know, so those two things were there. And then, so that was in March, and I have a specific date because Diana and I, she found the conversation online. She just posted, Diana Stimmel posted a coloring book, you know, news report, because they were starting to get a lot of press. I hadn't paid attention to that. I wasn't looking at doing coloring books. It was just a conversation at a party. And she posted, you know, a little report about coloring books and how popular they are. And we had a little back and forth conversation. And I said, oh, someone just suggested that I do a coloring book recently. That's interesting. And I said, I think I'm going to email my distributor tonight and see if he thinks that would be a good idea. I wrote the email that night. The next day he wrote back saying, I think so, yeah, that's a good idea. And then within a couple of days, he was starting to get wind of how coloring books are a big thing and saying, yes, we need coloring books. And it was almost overnight the energy took hold, which was the same thing with the soul cards the first time. Almost overnight they took hold. There was a yes, and the energy was there. And that's what I was waiting for. The feeling like the energy is there. So I'm not someone who like gets little voices or like sees little beings. You know, I'm more kinesthetic.
Yeah.
But I could feel the engagement with something bigger and more in the project. That's when I know it's right. Otherwise, it's just like an idea, and it doesn't have life to it.
Right.
And I could do it, but I was waiting for years for that feeling. And that's what powered me. So what he said was, have mock-ups for the salespeople by it was almost like by the first week in June, and this was May 12th. Mock-ups. So like, do you know how fast that happened?
Oh man.
I start looking at all my slides, looking at all my images, you know, my digital images, piles and piles and piles and piles, and I start throwing them into albums and just saying, what are the moods? And I remember thinking a lesson from the soul cards was, what's the difference between soul cards 1 and soul cards 2? Well, there is no difference. It's just more images. And that may be fine for soul cards, but I didn't feel like that was really a great format. Just more and more, I want to be able to keep something growing.
Yeah.
So I started thinking, well, what about themes for the coloring books? So I started looking through harvesting. I know I went back as far as 2003 because I have at least 2 drawings from the Gather the Women conference in San Francisco in the coloring book. And putting, just without any words attached, these kind of feel like the energy of love, and these feel more active, like creativity, and these are more inward, and these are really feminine, and these are like, there's a lot of nature images. So I really found like 5. I actually had 6 categories. The other category was the intense expressive ones. And I might do that book too, but I felt like, wait till I establish a little more trust with people before I do that, the coloring book. But that one will be coming. My title for it was Let It Out. I mean, you know, I just made these funny little titles. And then I actually I was working with some consultants, actually. They do very subtle work with helping people get aligned with their life calling and energy work. And it was in the midst of working with them. And the name of their thing is not in my brain right now, but and so all of a sudden we were actually doing the work of helping to fine-tune the titles together. So actually it was a collective job fine-tuning the titles to try and get the most simple, universal words. And then meanwhile working with Ross and my designer Vicky to do cover designs. So from May 12th, maybe 4 weeks to 5 mock-ups that I actually had printed. So it had to be less time than that because I got them printed in those those one-off art book printers so they could take them to Barnes & Noble. And so I made these little books with sample images and sample covers, and we definitely refined and learned from that. But that was really fast.
And what I love about this, is that, like, what you said a little bit ago in the beginning of the process is like, what do I do with all this work? And so many people who are like blocked artists or don't even consider themselves artists, that question stops them from doing the work.
Right.
And like,
if I don't have something to do with it, why do it?
Why do it? And that you were ready for that project to take hold. Right. And that so often, like, the project doesn't come to you before you have the work. The project comes to you and says, you have 4 weeks to make a mock-up.
Right. Absolutely. It's true. Yeah. And then I had like 12 years of work. I don't know how far back I went. I just remember that was 2003 conference. I had this enormous body of work that hadn't been at all tapped. It was sort of like since the Soul Cards 2, which was 2000, I hadn't done a harvest. So here's a lot of years, 15 years really of non-harvest, waiting.
Yeah.
And so that was a process of refinement, and I loved that. It was so fun. And then having to rephotograph them because of my original photographs weren't high enough quality, then having to actually find the originals, which made the reason that I don't just kind of hand drawings out, like, here, just take them home, wrap them up, let them get crinkled and take them home. Like maybe some people would like me to do at a conference where I feel like they're not really valuing them. It all made sense. I've told people, I'm developing an archive.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I'm going to do with the archive. What do you do with these drawings? I'm developing an archive. I used the archive. And if the originals weren't there, they couldn't make it into the book because I didn't have a good enough photograph of them, even when I'd photograph them. So
it's really validating of your process.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a method.
That's what I mean. You don't know until you look back. Even like, the little weird experiences in art school of scribbling, what's wrong with drawing a face.
Yeah.
These are really important moments, but you don't value them in the moment.
Yeah.
And being at a party where a woman says, why don't you do a coloring book? Absolutely planted a seed, because just watching that video wasn't enough. The seed was already like in my belly.
Yeah.
It was waiting to germinate.
Yeah.
So so people have their roles to play in our lives too. We don't I do a lot alone, and I need to open more to collaboration. But I know that there are people who play absolute essential roles in my life in the unfolding. I could go like this person, that person. In the soul cards wouldn't have happened, and in touch drawing wouldn't have unfolded, and all these things. Certain relationships at certain moments made all the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes you don't know till later.
Right. You don't know what it is.
So now with the coloring books, what's your wish for them now that they're alive and in the world and you birthed them?
Yes, great question. They stand between, I'm learning about them right now. So the energy came to do them, and they are emerging. Their power is emerging. So one of the things I'm learning is that they stand in a place between the soul cards and touch drawing. They're already images that people can relate to.
Wow, yeah.
Like the soul cards, but people are more actively engaged with them. They don't just look at it. They interact, they collaborate with the image. And maybe if they're not quite ready to do touch drawing, they get to still engage creatively. So they're standing in a wonderful place right in between. I see one of the areas I foresee out of a conversation with a woman who's a hospice consultant, for instance. Just like touch drawing has these different venues that can be used. She said, wouldn't it be wonderful if a hospice can bring these coloring books to a family? And so they can sit and color together. And I just actually had a conversation with someone yesterday on the phone, I think. And she said, isn't that interesting, because she was with someone who was dying and could see how uncomfortable the family was. And this woman had started coloring during her hospice time, and she would invite people to color. So it was affirming my feeling about this. And that when, children in the family, young people would come and they're uncomfortable with death, they could just be together because they don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
It's a way to be together without saying anything. I went home to be with my mother, and brought the coloring books, and she was doing some creativity in her elder years, some drawing and some writing, and but she wasn't anymore, and it was just not quite able to pull her will forces together to do that. The coloring books, she's colored so many drawings. She sits and focuses. For my own mother, it has been helpful. So much of the value that people get from doing original images actually is the feeling, the rhythm, the handling materials, the getting off of a computer. And in these coloring books, the invitation to be much more free form and flowing than other coloring books are so teeny and controlled. And some people really get something from that. And it might be a good brain exercise. But these are providing something so different because you don't have to worry about being perfect. You don't have to get it in between the lines. There's no such thing as that. And the invitation is to add, to write, to cover them all up, to embellish the image, and the examples that I'm seeing so far blow me away. One woman posted in the Facebook coloring groups that, you know, she was looking through the fullness of life and she saw this skeleton drawing, and I knew putting the skeleton drawing in was going to make it hard for some people. I said, but it's got to be there. And and she said, why did Deborah put the skeleton in there? And then she said, I've had enough of that. I don't want more of that. And then she decided to just go into it, and she says, I'm going to make this a light drawing. And she must have found some little things that she could print out of dancing skeletons. And she printed them out, and across the front of the big skeleton are all these little dancing skeletons. And then she colored it in this green and yellow and all this living energy around the skeleton. So she did a transformation of her own, you know, inner shadow fear, and saying yes to life herself. That kind of creative engagement is just so beautiful, and I'm really seeing those things, those stories happen. So from the extreme of someone who can barely do anything, they actually get to color and give form, to people who are engaged in their own, deeply in their own soul process, and know how to use these images to evoke a powerful process that's more dynamic and creative than using the soul cards would be. But my images are evoking a process like the soul cards, but letting people engage a lot more dynamically and creatively. So wow, for an artist, the path that I chose was not to go the art world route, and that's a whole other, you know, story in my life that I consciously was guided into that, to leave the art world and find a way for my art to be part of human life and culture. And the soul cards were really a step in that, because people relate to them so intimately. I'm still every day talk to people who, you know, still use them. You know, it's amazing. But these are taking it that next step where they're bringing their own creativity to my images, and my images are invoking their creativity. And then hopefully there will be people who come to touch drawing once they've done the coloring books. I mean, I certainly think that there will be an entry point to touch drawing, and a lot of people who've seen the soul cards have discovered touch drawing from there.
It's so interesting that the coloring books seem like an extension of that same facilitation style of holding space, and that just like the difference between certain coloring books being very directive and restrictive, that you've really mastered this way of holding just enough structure to invite somebody's fullness to be inside of that container.
Wonderful. Does they create a structure for someone to then come into their own and feel empowered. Yes, and I really, really am seeing that in the ones I've seen so far. So, and whenever I see them, I just really brings me joy. I'm kind of blown away to see my images colored by other people, and I don't know where I end anymore. You know, I don't know, there isn't a clear boundary of identity anymore. And I don't know where that's going, but I think that makes sense in terms of a cultural evolution.
And it's
some kind.
And it's interesting too, what you were saying of like now personally not feeling really fulfilled doing the like, oh, what am I feeling thing with your process, but that you're still using that work that you did with yourself to then offer that to other people, and that your creative process is really extending that out to others. So my last question, which is related to this, is do you have any quick suggestions for people who want to engage more fully or in a more fulfilling way with their creativity? Do you have just like some guidelines or suggestions or tips of how to make a creative process, you know, not painful and more fulfilling, and something that you actually want to do and get something out of?
That's a good question. Also, being willing to do it when it's painful is number one. You know, that it is not always fun and creative. And if people think I just go to the studio, you know, the willingness to be with it when it's uncomfortable is actually what gets you to the place where it's also joyful. I think we have a resistance to get through. And I think the more often we do it, the less resistance. So doing it as a practice, and I need to listen to myself again to find my new way of doing it as a practice.
Yeah.
But the more often we do it, the less resistance we have. And when we're not in touch with it, I think there's more resistance to do, and that is painful. To open up the channels again. You know, it's somewhat uncomfortable to get, you know. And so I know over the years, the more often I'm working, the easier it is to get into the flow and get into that feeling of being connected. And if I get out of touch with it for a while, I know I'm going to have to go through a little bit of an uncomfortable time to get there again. So regularity of practice certainly helps. There's a woman doing touch drawing now in the touch drawing group who's just made a commitment to do it once a week for 1 hour. That small. And it's mind-blowing what she's doing. Once a week for an hour. A commitment, you know. So let me see if there's anything else, but and not to, when we get out of touch with it, to not give up altogether. Just because you've got out of touch, well, you don't do it anymore. Doesn't mean you can't start all over again. You know, oh, I used to, but
right.
Well, why not just start again now? You know, so just because you've stopped doesn't mean you've stopped forever. You know, you can always find your way back, and I don't think we lose anything.
Right.
There might be a little resistance and uncomfortableness to get started, but also everything we have learned and grown in our life can come to play when we start creating again. So I don't think we lose a thing, and I think it's maybe one of the gifts of a visual art form. I mean, for certain physical art forms, it may be difficult to get back. You know, if you're a dancer, it might be hard to get back to your prime level, and you may be, although I also love the beauty of, you know, Butoh and certain ways of dancing that people do for a whole lifetime and value the old age dancer, and I think that's beginning to happen in dance, but particularly in visual art. I mean, you could be away from it for 10 years, start again. Every way you deepened and grew in your life will, you know, potentially feed you're going someplace deeper than you could have gone before. So just because you've stopped doesn't mean you've ended, you know? So to not give up, some way, shape, or form. But I think that inner motivation, whatever, you know, you have to have that. No one will ever, you know, do that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it can be helpful to set up a time with other people. I mean, some people holding each other accountable, you know, a friendship where you meet and create can really, really help because you support each other. And I probably could have had more of that over the years than I've given myself. You know, there have been times where I've had a little touch drawing group. And even if I didn't get in the studio that week, those people were coming over and we're going to draw, and I probably should do that again, you know. So, yeah, a couple of 1 or 2 friendships, creative friendships, where you can just support each other and make appointments, either to check in about what you're doing or to actually create together, because I think that creates that collective field where it's hard when you're all alone, but when you know, where 2 or more are gathered, there is something that happens. And I think that helps us get through that resistance part when we're all alone.
Yeah, and I can kind of carry you a little bit. You don't have to just push ahead on your own.
You're helping each other. Even if you're doing your own thing in the same space, that collective will help you stay with it in a deeper way. That there's a field that's held. Yeah, so I think that can be incredibly helpful, creative friendships. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to keep asking you and talking to you. I just feel so grateful for this conversation, and
so do I. I really appreciate that. It's all stuff I want to talk about and I want to articulate, and this is the first interview really about the coloring books. You know, so it's very exciting. I got to tell some of the story of it because I mean, I think I wrote something for New Leaf and it's on my website, but who goes to read? Having a video is going to be really wonderful.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, I'll post it as a coloring book video. Great. You know, story of the coloring books.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I just feel so grateful for the work that you do and your dedication to getting it out there and continuing to talk about it. And I feel like you're just an advocate for this way of doing art, and it feels really important and really powerful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and remember to like, share, and subscribe. We want as many people as possible to find out about the inspiring artists who come on Art Kitchen. The YouTube channel is youtube.com/MoGoldenVideos, and you can find and support this project at patreon.com/Mo.